Hey guys, we are excited to have you guys here. So first and foremost, we want to thank Utah Tech Leads for putting this together for us. We're excited to be able to host it. And there are several of you that aren't from Entrada. We're excited to have you guys here. Welcome to our office. You get to see kind of what our office is all about. So we're excited to have visitors. Always love having people come in. But I have the fortunate opportunity to introduce Rabbi Sam Spector. Fortunate enough to be able to call Rabbi Sam my friend. Been able to spend a lot of time with him and got to know him. Interesting fact about Sam. I think that he has more knowledge in his brain of random facts. It's pretty impressive. If you ever get to spend some time with him, it will never cease to amaze you of the facts that he has. But it's been a lot of fun getting to know Sam, and he has a lot of really good information. We've been able to have lots of conversations on the topic, and I've been able to learn a lot, and we're excited to be able to host him and share it with everybody else. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sam.
Thank you. Thanks, Chase. And yes, Chase is indeed a good friend. And thank you for coming and wanting to learn. I'm really excited about having, being able to be here and to teach you something. So where I just came from actually was a mandatory, something I made mandatory for my entire staff, which was that the FBI put together a Utah faith-based security symposium. And it was pretty much all law enforcement and then my employees that were there. And we said it's important that they're there because unfortunately, anti-Semitism is something that we regularly deal with. And one of the speakers at that at the symposium today was a former neo-Nazi who had former neo-Nazi leader who had not only left that group, but had devoted his life since then to try and combat the hatred that he had at one point helped spread and to get people out of that type of environment. And so I'm always really grateful, no matter how many people can come to have the opportunity to share with you a bit about anti-Semitism and how we can combat it. Hopefully we can someday have a world without all these isms and phobias and stuff and be more connected to each other. One of the things that really inspired me to want to do this work was when I was in college, I went to UC San Diego. Any tridents in the house? Nope. Okay. Well, it's worth a shot. But when I was at UC San Diego, there was unfortunately some racist incidences that targeted the Black community on campus. And there was protests, there were deep conversations, there was walkouts over it. And I went to some of those representatives of the Jewish community. And when I would be talking or, trying to build bridges, something that would often be told to me that I heard on more than one occasion is, well, anti-Semitism isn't a thing anymore. The Holocaust happened and there's been no more anti-Semitism. And so you're just a bunch of privileged people. There's some truth to that, but I'll get into that. But not fully, but in some ways. But that anti-Semitism is no longer a thing. And it's like, well, actually, that's very far from the truth. And we're unfortunately seeing a giant rise in anti-Semitism. It's kind of like how I've heard people say racism is no longer a thing because we had Obama as president. It's like, well, no, maybe that was a step in the fulfillment of Dr. King's dream, but that doesn't mean there's no more racism by any means. So let's just talk a little bit about basically what anti-Semitism is. I got a couple definitions here, one from the State Department, one from just Wikipedia. I'm going to go with the Wikipedia version because that's at sort of my level there of being able to understand things. And so it says in the green box that anti-Semitism is hostility to, prejudice towards, or discrimination against Jews. A person who holds such positions is called an anti-Semite. Anti-Semitism is considered to be a form of racism. So that's a question a lot of people have is how is it a form of racism when Judaism is a religion? I'll get to that in a little bit. So this comes from the US State Department. I'm going to just go through this fairly quickly, a couple slides of what examples of anti-Semitism are. So calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion, um, making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or power of Jews as a collective, such as, but especially not exclusively, the myth of a world Jewish conspiracy of controlling media, economy, government, etc. Accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, or even for acts committed by non-Jews. Denying the fact, scope, and mechanism or intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people during the Holocaust. Accusing Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. Then accusing Jews, Jewish citizens worldwide of being more loyal to Israel than their own countries, like the United States. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected of any other democratic nation. Using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism to characterize Israel or Israelis, and drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis and holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the state of Israel. Now, a lot of this stuff, this slide in particular, deals with Israel. Something to know and understand is that the state of Israel is a country, and that does not mean it's above criticism. It's not. I'm one of the biggest critics of Israel. I love Israel a lot, but at the same time, I have so many criticisms of Israel. Much like how I consider myself to be an extremely patriotic American, and probably all of us here, certainly in the last 3 years since we had the Trump presidency and then the Biden presidency, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, with these two very different leaders. I'm sure that whatever your political background is, either under President Trump or under President Biden or both, you've at times had your own criticisms of the American government. So I'll talk a bit later about when is criticism of Israel anti-Semitic, because I think there are some people who are afraid to even mention a criticism of Israel because they're afraid of being accused of being anti-Semitic. So origins of anti-Semitism, they go back thousands of years. This Friday night, the Jewish people are going to start to celebrate Passover, 8-day festival that commemorates us leaving Egypt and escaping the anti-Semitism of Pharaoh. And last month, our most recent holiday was Purim, in which we celebrate how we overcame the anti-Semitism of Haman. We often say that pretty much every Jewish holiday is they tried to kill us, they failed, now let's eat. And so it's kind of one of those. So we read in the Bible going back thousands of years about people hating Jews. But what we read in those accounts is more of the Jews as a tribe, as a people, and as an other. Maybe like how we might hear about people who have strong anti-immigrant views, radical anti-immigrant views in our own country today of how, oh, they're criminals, or, oh, they are not loyal to our country, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of what we read in the Bible. But we see anti-Semitism become a lot more prevalent in the past couple 1,000 years over different religious views. You see, before that, people didn't really care that Jews had a different religious belief than them, because let's say I'm somebody who practices the Greek, what we today call Greek mythology, and I believe in Zeus and 1,000 other gods. And then I encounter a Jewish person who believes in just one God. That's not a contradiction to my faith at all. I'm like, okay, I believe in thousands of gods, with Zeus being the king god. They believe in one God who I would call Zeus, who is the king god, essentially, and they just don't worship the other gods. with the rise of other monotheistic religions, namely Christianity and Islam, you start to have more conflict. Because before, if I met somebody who practiced the Greek religion, like I said, there's no conflict. My religion doesn't nullify that person's views. But as somebody who worships the same God I do comes up to me and says, wow, we worship the same God, we even have the same scriptures and stuff. And so, of course, Jesus is the Son of God and Lord and Savior. And I say, well, I don't agree with that. Then all of a sudden, what we're inadvertently doing is I'm saying, no, your religion is wrong. What you believe is incorrect. And they're saying to me, no, what you believe is incorrect. And I like to think that decent people, we can have differing views on certain things and say, oh, cool, you have another pathway to God, and let's go have lunch, and you'll have a bacon cheeseburger and I'll have something not as good, and we can be friends. And but for some people, they cannot handle the idea of being wrong. And we see this in so many different ways. Like I know people who are Democrats who will never sit at the same table as a Republican or somebody who voted for Donald Trump, or vice versa. We've probably all seen that. Maybe our Thanksgiving tables are a little smaller than they were 10 years ago. So, but we also see that different forms of anti-Semitism have emerged. And so that there isn't really just like, oh, this is anti-Semitism. There's a lot of different anti-Semitism. So I'm going to kind of briefly touch on each of those to help you being able to know what anti-Semitism is and how to identify it. And so, and also just why this is important for you all. You all work in tech, I understand, or you just didn't have anything else going on your Tuesday afternoon. I don't know. It's kind of like when I go to college graduations, there's like, no, there's like the family and friends of the graduates, and there's usually just some older folks who just go to those things. I don't know if that applies to any of you with this, but sorry, getting derailed here. So why this is important, just as people too, is that aside from making the world a better place and not being a jerk, is that you all, in a way, are ambassadors. You're ambassadors to the companies you work for your communities, and so on and so forth. And so I want you to think back a couple months ago to a company called Merrill Lynch. You've all heard of Merrill Lynch. It is a major, major company here in the United States that has probably hundreds of thousands of employees, certainly tens of thousands. And there was an incident that maybe you heard about where a guy ordered a smoothie and asked that there was no peanut butter in it or something. He ordered a peanut butter smoothie with no peanut butter, I think is. I was like, probably should have had different order. Anyways, they made him a smoothie and there was peanut butter in it, even though he had asked for no peanut butter. And his kid drank it, went into like anaphylactic shock and had to go to the hospital and stuff. So he was understandably upset, but he went back to the smoothie place and took the smoothie and threw it at the teenage girls who were working there and started berating them with racist and anti-immigrant comments. Now, again, this is one employee who turned out worked for Merrill Lynch and had been there for 25 years as an employee in a company that had tens of thousands of employees. But when you Googled for the next 2 weeks, Merrill Lynch, guess what the first thing that came up was? And his actions embarrassed that entire company. And so it's important to think about not only how you represent yourself, but ultimately how you represent the company or the communities that you're a part of. As you know, I'm Jewish. And so something, I'm a rabbi, but even if I wasn't a rabbi, I was just a Jewish person. That's something that for us as a marginalized group that we often have to think about, especially with anti-Semitism being as prevalent as it is that, oh, if I do something bad, then how's that going to be represented to all people as a reflection on Jewish folks? About a month ago, a rabbi in Ohio was arrested on rape charges, and I remember seeing on the internet start exploding with all these different groups saying like, "Oh, this is common in Judaism. This is common in what and like of anti-Semitic comments." And so, this one guy, we could look at him and say like, he did something horrible, and that is a reflection on him and his values. But all of a sudden, it reflects the entire communities that we're a part of. So let me go into these different forms of anti-Semitism. And I'll start with religious anti-Semitism. This is the Westboro Baptist Church. They hate everybody, and I'm very proud to say that we're one of the many groups that they hate. I feel like we're in good company. But religious anti-Semitism, as the name implies, has to do with religion. And so there are things about misconceptions on faith. And differing beliefs. Like, for instance, actually, like I said, Passover is coming up. We don't eat bread during Passover. We eat this cracker called matzah that tastes like the box it comes in. It's pretty gross. But one of the things is like with Passover, that happens in the springtime. And unless you live in Utah this week, that means that usually the weather is getting warmer, the days are getting longer. And think about it, before we had tech and electronics and stuff, if you were a kid who'd been living in Utah or somewhere like this all winter long under snow and days that lasted until 4 p.m. or whatever, what are you going to do once the weather warms up? And you're going to go outside and play. So now it's light out till 8 o'clock at night. And so that's what kids in Eastern Europe would do. And naturally, there'd be kids who didn't come home after dark or who got lost or something. And Passover and Easter overlap, and people not really knowing what Jews believe would say, "Oh, well, I know there's a Jewish village nearby," because Jews were forced to be segregated. I heard that Passover is a celebration of when Jews murdered Jesus. Not true. And so what Jews do to celebrate that is they take the blood of Christian children and use it to make their matzah and their food for Passover. And so they go, that must have been why this kid disappeared, and a whole mob would come and attack that Jewish village. Hundreds of Jews were killed because of things like this, and usually kid turned up like next day or something. Totally fine. But misconceptions of faith, like, oh, they're celebrating the death of Jesus by murdering children. No, nothing in Judaism. Actually, in Judaism, we are prohibited from consuming blood. Our meat can't have any blood in it. And so misconceptions of faith can lead to religious anti-Semitism. The view that Jews must convert to another faith. That's a form of anti-Semitism, that there's something wrong with us, that we're blinded by being, Jewish. Anger at Jews for rejecting Jesus, and charges of deicide, Christ killers. Maybe you've heard that before. Historically, I can give you some pretty good evidence to dispute the whole claim that Jews killed Jesus, but that's neither here nor there. Even if you do believe that Jews killed Jesus, holding Jews today responsible for that is, of course, not acceptable. Nothing to do with that. So next form of anti-Semitism we'll talk about is cultural anti-Semitism. That's the idea that Jewish values are undermining the fabric of society, kind of like what I mentioned just a moment ago about that rabbi who got charged with that heinous crime. Like every group of people, there are some not great folks who are Jewish. And so like when a Jeffrey Epstein or a Bernie Madoff emerges, we always cringe because we know what the comment sections of the internet are going to say about us as a collective people. Any baseball fans here, by the way? Cool. A couple of you. All right. Tough crowd. All right. So in Los Angeles, I got more hands, but we're in Utah. So I don't know if you remember 2011, big year. Ryan Braun won the National League MVP award. Now, not to build into stereotypes in a presentation on anti-Semitism, Jewish folks are known for many, many things. Our fantastic athletic skills is not one of the things we're best known for, even though there are actually a lot of fantastic Jewish athletes out there who are very impressive. Like, I can list a whole bunch actually, but I won't go into that. But I think about the movie Airplane, classic comedy, where the person says, I'd love to do some light reading, and the flight attendant hands them a pamphlet on Jewish athletes. But in 2011, Ryan Braun, the Hebrew Hammer, Jewish baseball player, won the Most Valuable Player award. So this was a big deal for us. We were stoked on that. We were so excited. And then lo and behold, a couple years later, Ryan Braun was revealed to be a cheater and a steroid user, and had lied about it and all these things. And we just all went, oh no, because we knew what was going to happen, and that is indeed what happened, that the internet was then flooded with comments about, well, he's Jewish, we had to know that he was doing this, and so on and so forth. Another example before I move on is during the 2016 presidential election, one of the Republican candidates during the GOP primaries went after then candidate Donald Trump and said, Donald Trump doesn't have American values. He has New York values. And somebody pressed him and said, what do you mean by that? And he said, trust me, everybody knows what I mean by New York values. I don't know what he meant by New York values. I've actually met this politician a couple times, and so hopefully he's not anti-Semitic. But the way that was heard by many Jewish people and folks who aren't Jewish was a dog whistle associating New York with Jewish people, and that if you elect Donald Trump, you're electing Jewish values into the White House to kind of get basically Southern white Christians to not vote for him. Oh, that picture, by the way, is just so I can explain what that is. That was a Rosh Hashanah Jewish New Year postcard from over 100 years ago of Americans welcoming in Eastern European Jewish refugees. And you see that the American Jews on the left-hand side are dressed like Americans and are clean shaven or clean cut and everything, as opposed to the Jews arriving from Eastern Europe and saying, basically, we need to make sure that we Americanize these folks. So next image is fairly graphic. In case graphic images disturb you, you might want to look away. But this is an image from the Holocaust from the town of Vinnytsia, Ukraine, what today is Vinnytsia, Ukraine. And I chose this because this is the village my grandfather was from. And a lot of my family was killed in this massacre. This Jewish person is being shot into an open grave in Vinnytsia of Jewish people. And that leads me to talk about racial anti-Semitism. And so, like I said, you might be wondering, how is anti-Semitism a form of racism if Judaism is a religion? Well, maybe some of you have been, given some money to the folks across the parking lot at ancestry.com, taking your DNA test or something like that, and it has revealed that you are 22% Swedish, 13% Italian, whatever. I get calls all the time from folks who are like, I am 14% Jewish. Well, tell me about that. Yay, you got some. Hey, what's going on? See you at Seder. What did you take a DNA test thing? What percentage did you get? Do you practice Judaism, or if you don't? Yeah. Do you mind me asking, do you have a religious faith you practice? You're LDS. Okay, cool. So, and what's your name? Layla. I planted you here, I feel like. So Layla is a practicing Latter-day Saint. There's actually a community here if you need me to connect you with anyone. But that was a joke. Anyway, so Layla's a practicing Latter-day Saint, but is also like, I'm Ashkenazi Jewish. Well, how does that work? Well, even though Layla's faith and religion is Mormonism, uh, when she took a DNA test, it showed she was a certain percentage Ashkenazi Jewish. What percentage did your DNA test say you are a Latter-day Saint? 0. What about like Lutheran or Presbyterian or like 4% Buddhist? And you're like, how'd that happen or whatever? Okay, so it said Irish, but it didn't say Catholic. So thank you for example, Layla. So how did Layla's DNA test show that she was Jewish or had Jewish ancestry? For hundreds of years, Jews were segregated into places where only Jewish people could live. And over time, they developed their own DNA, their own languages like Yiddish, Ladino, their own culture, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a result, Ashkenazi Jewish people from Central Eastern Europe do have a specific DNA. But what the Nazis saw this as was they saw us as an inferior race. And recently, Whoopi Goldberg got into some hot water because she said that the Holocaust was not about race. It was about, this was a conflict between two groups of white people and man's inability to see humanity in their fellow man. And she's right and she's wrong. So it absolutely was about race because the Nazis did not see us as white people. But where she's right is I am a white person and I have the ability to mask myself. I always say if I do this, I look less like Rabbi Spector, more like Elder Spector. I can mask my Jewish identity in a way that like Whoopi Goldberg cannot mask being black. But anyways, though, so we see that Ashkenazi Jews actually are an ethnic group, unlike like Presbyterians or Lutherans or Catholics or other groups. We are an ethnic group, and some folks have used that to see us as an inferior DNA and even as a threat. A couple of years ago, there was a shooting at a synagogue outside of San Diego in Poway, California, and the shooter in his manifesto wrote how basically your average Jewish person just looks like a normal white person. And so if you're walking down the street and you don't know that I'm Jewish, I might marry somebody who isn't Jewish, and then, we'll have kids and stuff, and I'm then polluting their pure white DNA. And so this was his motivation for carrying out that shooting in Poway, California, was I need to defend the pure white race against Jews who are trying to infiltrate that and contaminate that. And that is the same ideology that Nazis had. The white circles are pure German ancestry. This was the Nuremberg laws that the Nazis put out. And the black circles are people who are Jewish. And so you see that depending on how many that German citizens of Jewish ancestry, depending on how much Jewish ancestry they had, lost a lot of their privileges and rights and faced persecution. And for Jewish folks outside of Germany in places like Poland and other places that were taken over by the Nazis, kind of like Layla here, there were people who didn't practice Judaism. They were practicing Christians or something like this. And then one day they got taken away by the Nazis and they had no clue why. And it was because the Nazis had found that person had a Jewish grandparent. And so even though they were practicing Christian, they were seen as Jewish. For the Nazis, this was not religious anti-Semitism whatsoever. It was purely racial anti-Semitism because they didn't care really what you practiced. They cared about your ethnic background. And that brings me to economic anti-Semitism. So here we have a political cartoon from somewhere anti-Semitic on the internet, showing a sow and says Rothschild and Bank. And then it shows a bunch of terrorist organizations, Boko Haram, Al Qaeda, ISIS, as well as the governments of Israel, US, and UK, all sucking at the teat of this Jewish pig. And the message here is that Jews are pigs who basically control world governments and also fund all the world wars. And so some stereotypes for economic anti-Semitism are that all Jews are wealthy, that Jews are stingy and greedy, that powerful Jews control the business world, media, Hollywood, that Jewish religion emphasizes profit and materialism, and that it's okay for Jews to cheat non-Jews, and that Jews use their power to benefit only their own kind. Some origins of this also include like the Shylock character in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, and also the practice of usury. In case you don't know what usury is, that is charging interest on a loan. Now, Christians, by Christian law, were not allowed to charge interest on loans that they'd give to other folks. So let me ask you all something. If I need a $5 million loan, and I tell you, give me $5 million, and in 5 years, I'll pay you back $5 million. Would any of you do that? Why not? I'll give you your $5 million back in 5 years. Why wouldn't you do that? Inflation, $5 million in 5 years won't be worth what $5 million is today. Hell, at the rate things are going right now, $5 million tomorrow won't be worth what $5 million is today. But also, does that benefit you at all? You're kind of like, I might need that $5 million. Now, let me ask you something. If I were to say, hey, can I have a $1 million loan, and in 6 years, I will give you back $5 million. Would you do that? That might be a good transaction. Well, that's how loan companies work. Anybody who has taken out a loan knows this. If you've taken out a student loan, a mortgage, whatever, you know this. Like, I remember I took out a $20,000 loan to get through rabbinical school, like my final year of rabbinical school. I didn't know how I was going to pay for school. And then a loan company came along and said, well, we'll give you the $20,000 you need. And I was like, wow, thank you, loan company. You're so nice. Gosh, loan companies are like the best. And so I take out this $20,000 loan. Then a year late, and they said, you don't even have to start paying it till 6 months after you graduate. I was like, wow, loan company, thank you. And so then I graduate school. 6 months later, I get a letter from the loan company saying, hey, Mazel Tov, Rabbi Sam, you became a rabbi. Time to pay us that money you owe us. So I was like, oh yeah, $20,000. No, $24,000. It's like, no, that's a mistake. I only took $20,000. Yeah, but the interest. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, here's $1,000. And they're like, great. Now you only owe us $23,300. And I'm like, those greedy sons, like that's like all of a sudden I was like furious with these people I'd been so grateful for. Well, Jews were not allowed to become doctors or to work in most business sectors in the Middle Ages in Europe. The only profession they were allowed, that most Jews were allowed to have, was loan giving, because Christians couldn't give loans to each other. So anybody who needed a loan had to go to Jews, and this was the one business they were allowed to be in. And as a result, this stereotype of greedy, wealthy Jews came into place. And this brings me to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. In the early 1900s, an anti-Semitic forgery, which was written by these Russian police officers that were very anti-Semitic, was published, called the Protocols of Elders of Zion. And it was a book that was claimed to be written by Jewish people that was talking about how Jews were going to take over the world and how Jews controlled all the world's money. And this book, believe it or not, became and still is a bestseller. In many parts of the world, this book continues to be a bestseller. And even in our own country, one of the people that paid for the publishing of hundreds of thousands of copies of this was Henry Ford, who would distribute it to everyone he knew. And if you bought one of his cars, would give you a copy of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. In one of my travels, I remember I met a young man from Africa, and I told him I was Jewish, and he had all these questions for me. And he said, well, and also tell me about the money. I was like, what money? He's like, the bank account, the Rothschild account. I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, come on, I know about it. How you guys have a bank account where you take money from Christians and it's pooled into a giant bank account, and that has trillions of dollars in it, and any Jewish person can go and take money from it whenever they want. When he said this, I was like so upset and furious, because I was like, nobody's told me about this account. Like, I want some of that money. And then I was like, where did you hear about this? And he was like, I read about it in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I was like, oh, that's not real. And I had to explain to him how Jews didn't really write that book. And there's no, sad to say, I had the student loans. There's no bank account that we can all draw from. And so these are some of the pictures that you would see on the cover and associated with it. Oops, let me go back one. So, and that brings me to another form of anti-Semitism, political anti-Semitism. Blaming Jews for economic and national hardships. Controlling, so like for instance, we have a sitting member of Congress who wrote a few years ago on Twitter that California wildfires were started by Jewish space lasers. And it's like, nope, not true. That's crazy. So blaming Jews for economic and national hardships. Controlling world governments. Notable examples of this include Nazi Germany, how Hitler, in his book Mein Kampf, his autobiography, he wrote that basically all of Germany's woes, financial woes after World War I, were because of what he called the secret Jew, the secret Jewish organization that was trying to destroy Germany. And a few years ago, we had the worst anti-Semitic attack in US history on the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue. The reason for this was that the person who carried out this attack had heard on right-wing media a claim that kind of an anti-Semitic dog whistle that George Soros, who's Jewish, was funding a caravan of millions of undocumented migrants to invade the southern border of the United States. And so this was on a mainstream, like this was on Fox. And so like you have to be so careful what you say. That's not true, for one. That was not a true claim. But he then attacked a synagogue because he said the Jews are trying to ruin our country. And then so some of these claims also we've seen coming up with blaming Jews for the coronavirus. I'll show some slides on that in a second. And also things like the Black Plague on Europe. This happened in the mid 1300s, decimated a third of Europe's population in a period of like 5 years. And Jewish communities were not hit as hard because they were segregated, and also because Jews practice a lot of bathing rituals as part of our religion, which was not common among other groups at that time. And so the rumor got started that the Black Plague on Europe was because Jews were poisoning the wells. And so what happened was that mobs in Europe, and this picture depicts this over here, mobs in Europe took Jewish communities, and over 250 Jewish communities were completely decimated, and the inhabitants of them were mostly burned alive. In the town of Basel, Switzerland, even a barn was constructed for this purpose. In the town's 600 Jews were put into the barn, and it was closed and lit on fire. Over here, we see an example of political anti-Semitism. So if you've already heard my presentation, don't answer this, but we have here, this was done when President Trump was president of the US and Prime Minister Netanyahu was then Prime Minister of Israel. And so we see here Donald Trump wearing a yarmulke, being depicted as Jewish and also being blind. and being led by a Jewish seeing eye dog with Netanyahu's face and an elongated nose, wearing a Star of David collar. So we have this basically blind Jew president who's being led and controlled by his Jewish dog. Anybody know where this was published? Or what part of the world? Yeah, a lot of people think maybe the Middle East, maybe this was on an Al Qaeda website or a white supremacist website or something. This was published in the New York Times by a cartoonist who no longer works for the New York Times. So like I said, anytime there's some sort of outbreak of some sort of national hardship, recession, whatever it is, Jews are blamed for it. I remember when I was in college, somebody going through and distributing DVDs where he was explaining, and you've probably heard this even because it was such a common belief that Jews were responsible for 9/11 or something like that. Of course, not true. But that Jews were responsible for 9/11, or that a disproportionate number of Jews took that day off, and it was like actually 400 Jewish people died in 9/11. And so we're seeing the same thing with the coronavirus, both regarding the virus and also the vaccine, where these are things from the internet of Jews infecting the world with coronavirus or being a Trojan horse with coronavirus. This was at an anti-mask rally in Ohio, where somebody's holding up what looks like the Israeli flag and says the real plague, and it shows a Jewish rat with a Star of David on it. And some more as well, the idea that Jews are profiting off of the coronavirus, that Israel and the coronavirus has teamed up to exterminate the Palestinians, and a scientist looking underneath a microscope and saying, wow, this virus is terrifying. And then you see a stereotypical looking Jewish person as the virus. And like that Jews are the real virus. So yeah. And by the way, like again, what the Nazis would do in their propaganda is they would have show film of rats. And when we see rats, like if you saw a rat in your kitchen, you'd probably be disgusted because it's like dirty and disease, and that's dangerous. And then they would fade into pictures of Jewish people, letting folks know like these are our rats. These are the people carrying these diseases. Finally, the last form of anti-Semitism I'm going to talk about is new anti-Semitism. And that is basically holding Jews outside of Israel responsible for Israel's actions, or claiming that Jews are not loyal Americans, they're more loyal to Israel, or also targeting Israel in an anti-Semitic way. So I had so many people who came up to me, by the way, and said, you must love President Trump because he's been amazing for your country. And I was like, why are you saying my country? It's our country. You're American also. And then like when I would talk to them and I realized they were saying your country, Israel. And I'm an American. I was in the US Navy. I was like, I'm a very proud American, but seeing me not as American, but that Israel's my country, not the US. When I was in college also, I remember somebody coming up to me and shouting, get the hell out of Palestine. And I was like, dude, I'm in San Diego. What are you talking about? And then realizing, oh, he sees that I'm Jewish. So he is holding me responsible for the actions of the Israeli government. This again is form of anti-Semitism. We have a Democrat member of Congress, sitting member of Congress, who use some of these tropes, saying that the U.S. supports Israel only because it's all about the Benjamins, and then talked about how US Jews are more loyal to Israel than they are America. So something I often hear is, well, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist. I think since the Holocaust, it's not particularly, PC or popular to say that you were an anti-Semite. And so what is Zionism? Because I've heard all these things like Zionism is a form of racism. Zionism is a form of militant terrorism. Zionists want to kill every Palestinian child or something like this. What Zionism is, like, you can Google the definition. Zionism is the belief that the Jewish people have the right to self-determination with an independent state in their historic homeland, the land of Israel. If you believe that, you're a Zionist. You don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. Joe Biden, who's Catholic, he says he's a Zionist. I know Zionists who are very right-wing in Israel who believe that they should kick out every single Palestinian out of the land. And I know Zionists in Israel who are super left-wing, who are always getting arrested for being in left-wing protests and who strongly support the creation of a Palestinian state. And they're still Zionists. So when is criticism of Israel anti-Semitic? I like to look at the 3 Ds, as Natan Sharansky called it. So the 3 Ds are delegitimization, which is denying that Israel has a right to exist. And so if you are saying every other country has a right to exist except for the one Jewish country, that's anti-Semitic. Another different member of Congress, on her first day in office, she put a piece of tape over Israel and wrote Palestine across it. Israel was created by a United Nations vote. It exists. It's existed for over 70 years and it legally exists. And so denying the only Jewish country in the world as the one country you say doesn't have a right to exist, that's a form of anti-Semitism. Demonization, claiming that Israelis want to kill every Palestinian or making blanket statements like this. Not true at all. I was in Israel a couple of weeks ago. I was actually in Israel and the Palestinian territories. I went for a day to Ramallah, which is the capital of the Palestinian territory, like the heart of the West Bank Palestinian territories. And I will tell you, and if any of you have been to Israel or the Palestinian territories, you probably know this. The vast majority of people there are incredibly nice, incredibly decent, good human beings. And on both the Palestinian and Israeli side. So demonizing an entire group of people, that's anti-Semitic. And then finally applying double standards, like applying standards to Israel that you wouldn't apply to any other country, that's anti-Semitic as well. So for example, a popular movement is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. I see that as an anti-Semitic movement because and I'm not excusing anything Israel does or trying to do whataboutisms, but the countries that surround Israel all have far worse human rights records than the state of Israel does. If I were a Muslim, if I were a woman, if I were gay, I would rather be in Israel than Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, wherever. And yet, despite that, we see that there's this disproportionate move to boycott only one country, and that is the one and only Jewish state. So if you're going to boycott Israel, that's like because you don't agree with its policies and so great, fine. But just don't apply that standard only to Israel and not to any other country. That's anti-Semitism. And I remember in college again, there was what people said was a pro-Palestinian rally, and I went to it. And I saw that it was not a pro-Palestinian rally. It was an anti-Israel rally because there was nothing about supporting the Palestinian people. It was all about tearing down Israel and Israelis. And they had a giant sign that all these statistics, and it was like 250,000 Palestinians kicked out of their homes since 1948 by Israel. 14,000 something Palestinians killed by Israel since 1948. And I asked them, I said, you're supposed to be advocating for the Palestinian people? Why don't you have that in 1 month, September of 1970, Jordan killed 20,000 Palestinians? Why don't you have that in the mid 90s, Saudi Arabia, because of the Palestinian support for Saddam Hussein, kicked out 50,000 Palestinians from their home? Why don't you have that in Lebanon? 250,000 Palestinians still do not have citizenship because the government won't give it to them. Why don't you keep up your criticism of Israel, but what about all these other Palestinians you aren't advocating for? And the answer I got was, well, if you think about it, those Palestinians who were in Jordan were there because they got kicked out of their homes by Israel. So it's technically Israel's fault, not the Jordanian government's fault. That's, again, a massive double standard. If you all want to use that logic, please, any of you can feel free to come up here and Will Smith slap me in the face and be like, well, technically, I didn't assault Sam. His family came to America only because the Tsar of Russia persecuted them. And so it's really Tsar Nikolai II's fault, not my fault. And it's kind of that's not how that works. So today, what about anti-Semitism in America today? Because like I said, a lot of folks say anti-Semitism isn't really a thing anymore, because this is what anti-Semitism used to look like. That privileges of the swimming pool are extended only to approved Gentiles. Or my dad grew up in a time where Jews were not allowed into country clubs. Jews were not allowed to live. Like I said, I went to UC San Diego, which is in La Jolla, California. Jews until the early 1960s were not allowed to live in La Jolla. That's what anti-Semitism used to look like. And it was easy to spot racists and anti-Semites because they were the people who were marching in white hoods and stuff down the street. Well, today, American Jews make up 2% of the US population, actually a little under 2%. Yet we make up 58% of victims of religious hate-based violence in America, hate crimes. So if you think about that, even though Jews make up less than 2% of the US population, we are targeted as religious hate-based victims more than all other religious groups combined. 25% of American Jews have been victims of anti-Semitism in the last 12 months. And 40% of American Jews hide that they are Jewish openly because of this. Anti-Semitic activity over the past 5 years has been the highest ever recorded since recording began in the early 1970s. And we saw in May of 2021, a 500% increase in that 1 month of anti-Semitic activity, including here in Utah. Why in May 2021? That was the most recent war between Israel and the Hamas group in Gaza Strip. And so people, again, and by the way, Muslim communities also experienced more Islamophobia during that month too. So it wasn't just us. It was people who were holding American Jews and American Muslims responsible for what was happening in Israel and the Palestinian territories. And this is a problem we're seeing, unfortunately, on both the left and the right in our country, as our country is getting more polarized. On the far right, we are seeing more and more people who are like that one congresswoman going into crazy conspiracy theories that it's just how can anybody believe that? But again, a few months ago, there was 300 people who camped out in Dallas, Texas, waiting for JFK Jr. to come back from the dead to announce his run with Donald Trump for president. And it's who believes this? But there are clearly people who do. And so we're seeing on the far right, what we're seeing on the far right is more conspiracy theories and also more racial anti-Semitism. Charlottesville, people marching down the street shouting, "Jews will not replace us," things like that. On the far left, we're seeing more and more new anti-Semitism, and also some economic anti-Semitism too, of Jews being the elitists who control things and stuff like this. And why this is a growing problem. Like I said earlier today, I heard a former neo-Nazi talking, and he was talking about his experience as a neo-Nazi in the late 80s, early 90s. And he said the problem is a lot bigger today than it was in the late 80s and early 90s, because your next door neighbor might be a Nazi. The person you work next to might be a Nazi. And you don't know that, because now with the internet, people can go on QAnon sites, Reddit sites, et cetera, and inhale anti-Semitism without realizing. Well, some of them might not even realize it's anti-Semitism, but he was talking about the different ways that anti-Semites and racists target people and recruit people on the internet. And so people who might seem totally normal are, again, not the ones wearing hoods and stuff anymore, just the people who go home and then go on the internet or play a multiplayer game on the video game on the internet, can be inhaling anti-Semitism. And how this affects us as a Jewish community, by the way, so like when the Poway, California shooting happened, or when the Colleyville hostage situation happened a few months ago, or when the Pittsburgh shooting happened. I mean, there's 14 million Jews in the world. They know that they're not going to kill every single Jewish person. What they're banking on is that people are not going to feel safe in their synagogues. My synagogue, we're not a particularly wealthy synagogue by any means. We are spending $200,000 to make security upgrades to our building. My last synagogue in Los Angeles, which had every year a six-figure deficit, was spending $340,000 a year on security. And when you came to that synagogue, it looked like you were entering a prison, basically. Massive walls, guard towers, armed guards, and metal detectors, like I said, having to show an ID to get in, and then if you didn't have a fob, doing a background check on you before you could enter, being wanded down, and also making sure your car was checked for bombs, and also having bulletproof glass. That was our synagogue. My current synagogue has bulletproof glass, and we have bullet holes in it for people who've shot at us. And so what the hope is that by putting us in this type of situation, our communities can be financially crippled, and then Judaism will end that way. So that's kind of what we go through. So how do we combat anti-Semitism? By one, doing what you're doing today, coming out and learning about it. Thank you. But here's some quotes. Maybe you've heard of these, like the famous Martin Niemöller quote from the Holocaust, like, first they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist, etc. And then they came for me and there was no way left to speak out, and how silence only helps the oppressor. It can be awkward sometimes to speak out. I've found myself in that position. Maybe you have too. A few months ago, a congregant of mine forwarded me and a few other people an email, and it was said Jewish accomplishments. And so I opened it, and it said, Jews make up only 0.3% of the world's population, and yet Jews have won more than 40% of Nobel Prizes. Great. But then it said next to that, in comparison, Muslims make up 25% of the world population, and Muslims make up about 3%, I think it was, of Nobel Prizes. It was like, Jews have accomplished this super impressive thing, but look how dumb Muslims are. And it was kept going back and forth like that. And it made me really uncomfortable. And it was an older gentleman who just forwarded a chain thing, and I know him as a nice man. And I think he kind of mindlessly forwarded it. And so I responded to him and said, isn't it great? Because I didn't want to shame him. I wanted to educate him. And I privately messaged him and said, isn't it great what we've accomplished? Like, Jews have accomplished so much. but I think we can celebrate our accomplishments without putting down other people. Muslims have actually accomplished a lot too. Can I send you a book from National Geographic on 1,000 different Muslim contributions to the world? And lo and behold, the next Shabbat, he came up to me and said, I want to apologize. I just forwarded that and I reread it, and my email was racist. And I'm going to think harder before I do something like that again. So to fight anti-Semitism, call it out, or any type of ism. Ask yourself too, do my Jewish friends and colleagues feel comfortable being openly Jewish? I've heard this called like the yarmulke test. Now, most Jews don't wear a yarmulke or kippah like I do, but would you feel comfortable doing it? There are parts of this country and parts of the world, like for instance, I mentioned I was in Ramallah a couple of weeks ago. I wore a baseball cap in Ramallah. I'm not going to walk around Ramallah showing that I'm Jewish. And that's sad. And there are parts of our own country that I will wear a baseball cap in. Ask yourself, in my community, do Jewish people feel comfortable being openly Jewish? And if the answer is no, then that means you have a problem. Do we allow for Jewish people to have their observances? Last week I spoke at overstock.com, and they do a pretty cool thing there. So we all get Easter and Christmas off from work. Well, actually, I don't know if you all do, but those are, Christmas is a federal holiday and stuff. And and what do I do with that? To be honest, all my friends are in church and every restaurant is closed. So I go, except for Chinese food. So my community, we all just go and have Chinese food together. And we're kind of annoyed that we have the day off. But then when we try and get Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur off, our two holiest days of the year, what we're so frequently told is you can take a vacation day for that, or that's an unexcused absence, or we really can't have you leave work that day. Like you can have Christmas off, which you don't celebrate, but you can't have your holiest day of the year off. So what Overstock does is they have a couple of floating days to make sure that everybody, that their non-Christian employees can take a day off of work and not be penalized or even have to be put in a situation where they have to say, would I rather have my holiest day of the year off or go spend vacation with my family? Like, because that's what so many people have to do is if I use a vacation day, that means I can't do something with my family. Meet Jewish people. You're more than welcome. We do require vaccinations, but everybody's welcome to come to our services for Shabbat. You can just email me. I'll send you the times and stuff. And some of you have been to our Shabbat services. I recognize some of you. Thank you. Educate yourself and educate others too. Like, I do not charge for this presentation at all. People want to make donations to our synagogue or to the Jewish community. We're always grateful, but we do not charge for this. Bring me to your companies or to your friends' companies or your church or your kid's school, whatever. Happy to talk to you all. And advocate for legislation that combats anti-Semitism and also all forms of bigotry. When I came to Utah, we were one of 4 states in the country that did not have a hate crime bill. Fortunately, now we do. I mentioned that there are bullet holes in my synagogue. This is from about 6-7 years ago, a white supremacist who shot at my synagogue. There was nobody in the building at the time that he shot out the windows of my synagogue. And so he was not charged with attempted murder or anything like that. And since we did not have a hate crimes bill, he was initially charged with misdemeanor vandalism. And so now we have this legislation, and also the Utah House and Senate just passed a concurrent resolution that the governor is signing next Monday that condemns anti-Semitism. So support that stuff. And also, if you have a politician that represents you who is saying anti-Semitic things, because like I said, we have Democrats and Republicans who are both doing that, let them know, hey, I maybe really agree with your policies, but your anti-Semitic rhetoric is a deal breaker for me. You need to stop that or you'll lose my vote. And finally, support Jewish causes and Jewish charities, because like I said, a Jewish food bank, for instance, is doing the same great work that the Christian food banks are, but they're having to spend money on security that other places aren't, and they could really use your support. So Yeah, like that's a great thing to do, is support Jewish organizations. I used to drive past so many churches when I worked at that synagogue that spent $340,000 a year on security. And with all these churches, you could just walk into them. And I was like, what type of programming could we do? What kind of type of difference could we do if we didn't have to spend $340,000 a year on this? I just listed a few things that my synagogue does to, like, you know, help Utah. These are just some of the things we do, by the way. Um, Tonight we're having a whole thing, virtual thing on helping Ukraine, just to kind of, again, combat that notion that Jewish people only care about other Jewish people. No, we try and make our community a better place. And finally, just here's my contact information if you have any questions, or like I said, want to bring me to your company, or just, come visit my synagogue, please feel free to reach out to me. And in case you're looking for other resources on combating anti-Semitism, these first two organizations, the ADL and AJC, are great national organizations devoted to fighting anti-Semitism. And then locally, we have a wonderful Jewish Federation, which has an anti-Semitism task force as well. I talked longer than I meant to. That's the hazard of being a rabbi. Did any of you have any questions? Please feel free to ask me anything. Any question for sake of learning is a good question. Been very attentive. I appreciate it. Well, I guess I was pretty comprehensive. Oh, please. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. Bless you. Thank you, Sonny. I appreciate you saying that. One of the more moving things that happened was, after the Pittsburgh shooting. I'd been in Utah for like 2 months, and we organized. This was at one of our sister congregations, and we organized a vigil at our synagogue. And I ordered something like 100 candles or something for people to light at this. And I was like, okay, well, we can use the extra ones for, something else in the future, but that should be good. We had close to 1,000 people who came, and most were not Jewish. Most were just folks from the community. And so, like, just people, and who showed up, to show us that they loved us. And, I've spoken to a whole bunch of companies for the last few months, and I've gotten hundreds of emails from people saying, thank you, that was amazing, that was really informative and stuff. And so, yeah, I try and focus that there was that one horrible man in Pittsburgh that did something so evil and creates so much pain. And then just at our one little synagogue, 1,000 people came to show us love. And I can only imagine nationally how many people there were. So try and look for the good. Was there another question over here? Yeah, please. Yeah. On like Judaism in general, or? Yeah, there's a lot. For people who are interested in conversion, we don't proselytize, by the way, but sometimes people are interested in becoming Jewish on their own. Choosing a Jewish life kind of gives a good. Benita Diamant is a good book to read. There's so many books on Jewish history. A book that a guy named Joseph Telushkin wrote is called Jewish Literacy, and that's like, I have some issues with Joseph Telushkin on some of his writings, but that's a very comprehensive book on a lot of Jewish history, Jewish belief, stuff like that. What's interesting about Jews, though, is unlike the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's very hierarchical, and you have like a prophet that can speak for the church. We don't have anything like that. So Every Jewish person you talk to will give you a different interpretation, opinion, and that's encouraged for us. But My Jewish Learning is a wonderful website too, where you can basically look up anything and it won't really give you a bias or slant or like an extreme version of Judaism, but has great articles. So I really refer a lot of people to My Jewish Learning, and as a great place for looking up specific things like what is this holiday Passover about or whatever. Please. That's a great question. In terms of like anti-Semitism, yeah. Well, growing up in Seattle, I I was this weird kid who wanted to be a rabbi, which did not make me particularly cool as a 15-year-old. But high school was a little rough. I think that kids find things to pick on each other about. Like, for instance, we had one kid in my whole school that was a Latter-day Saint, and that kid got ripped on every day for being a Latter-day Saint. I'm seeing some Latter-day Saints who are not from Utah being like, I was that kid. So just brought back some painful memories. And so, yeah, I remember growing up, some anti-Semitic taunts. When I was in high school, middle school, that was when the second Intifada was going on, and so a lot of things related to Israel too. And In Seattle, in particular, I faced a lot of new anti-Semitism. But I remember once being sucker punched in the back of the head at high school and being called a dirty Jew when it happened. In college, I was like very involved in Zionist causes, and I had a wonderful college experience at UC San Diego. But I remember people who were kind of, again, in that new anti-Semitism view, not knowing that I'm actually a huge supporter of two-state solution, have lots of Palestinian friends, have, I'm very much in favor of Palestinian rights. Saying some very horrible things about me on the internet, and some very anti-Semitic things based off of my Zionism. And yeah, LA is just a big, big city, and so you get all sorts of stuff. What the difference between here and there is people are so nice here, but in Los Angeles, if you typed in rabbi or Los Angeles or synagogue Los Angeles, Jewish Los Angeles, so many things come up. I was the president of my neighborhood association of rabbis in Los Angeles. We do not have a neighborhood association of rabbis in Utah. So here I've found that people are so nice. And at the same time, if you Google Rabbi Utah, Jewish Salt Lake City, synagogue Salt Lake City, like I'm what comes up largely. And so, we do get, I don't think there's more anti-Semitism here. And at the same time, we get targeted more because we get, more attention, and like we're what people find. So, and it's hard, like when a car drives very slowly past my house, my wife and I, we get panic attacks over that. We're like, why is that person driving slowly past our house? We don't know what's going to happen at the moment. But yeah. So any final questions or comments or anything? Cool. Well, thank you. You know how to get a hold of me, and thank you. I want to give a big thanks to Sunny and Utah Tech Leads folks, and also a huge thanks to Entrada. Really, for the past few months, Entrada has shown a wonderful example of what it means to be an ally, and has been very helpful in organizing educational things like this, and generous. And so we've had a couple wonderful examples here of what people can do to fight anti-Semitism, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.